we will hand it over to Roger Albee to introduce our speaker.
Thank you very much. It gives me pleasure to introduce Diane Bothfeld, somebody I have known and worked with closely as a colleague when I was Ag Secretary at the agency. Diane has a great background in dairy and as well as in agriculture. She grew up on a Diane small dairy farm in Cabot, not that many years ago. You're that young. But it's a family operation and a wonderful family. And got her master's in ruminant nutrition. Any of you who are dairy people know that's about the nutrition of dairy cows and other animals. And she has a long history in working in agriculture. After getting her master's at UVM, she worked in UVM Extension, and then she worked as a field person with the former St. Albans Cooperative up in St. Albans with dairy farmers. She's been with the Agency of Agriculture for 10 years and is the dairy person. Dairy, as she will explain, represents about close to 70% of the gross farm income in Vermont in the farm sector. It's been under extreme financial stress for the last 5 years at least. And Diane has been there trying to figure out with the rest of us what the future holds. So Diane, great pleasure and thank you for doing this.
Thank you, Roger, and thank you, Marty, for inviting me to come address your group today. I am going to share my screen so you can see my presentation, so hopefully that will be seamless. The host has disabled the participant screen sharing, so the host of this meeting has to give me power to share my screen. So I'm not sure who the host is.
Marty?
Okay. Yep, got it. Got it. All right. And okay, people can see my screen. I think I can see some nods. Great. So today I'm going to give you an overview of Vermont agriculture. It will be heavy on the dairy industry. I'm quite willing to take questions. I see using the chat is fine, but also glad to address if people wave, or I'll let you as the moderator stop me. I do talk fairly fast and fairly loudly, so you won't have trouble hearing me, but you may have trouble slowing me down. So we'll get started into this as today we're going to talk about the agriculture and the Vermont state economy, dairy being the largest sector, and then that impact on the state economy. What are the latest statistical data for Vermont agriculture? What are we seeing for trends? Dairy, the non-dairy agriculture, land and farm production. And then as we're all living through this time of COVID and what that impact has been on Vermont agriculture. So in the 2017 Agricultural Census, USDA completes an agricultural census every 5 years. The last was 2012, 2017, the next will be 2022. So this is the newest and freshest data that we have. I know it feels long ago, 2017 already, but this is the newest data. Total sales of agricultural products in Vermont, $780 million. So it's a fairly large part of the Vermont economy. The farm to plate is a subgroup of the Vermont Sustainable Jobs Fund. They've been doing a lot of work on agriculture and the food system in Vermont. Their 2018 annual report looked at Vermont's food system as being a $10 billion industry. There has been a tremendous growth in jobs. In the last few years, from 2010 to 2017, the farm to plate network shows 6,500 net new jobs. So truly net jobs increase in that sector of business in Vermont. And the increase in economic development in Vermont from the farm and food sector, 12.9% growth of total food and beverage purchases in Vermont spent on local products. So that's very positive, the local buying. The U.S. Census data shows that 20% of all Vermont farms sell directly to consumers. And that's a big growth. And Vermont is a leader across the United States in that percentage. We have a lot of sales that occur through farmers markets, community supported agriculture, CSAs, and then direct sales from farmers into our supermarket and grocery store system. So a lot of sales directly from farmers to consumers. Some of the examples, some of these businesses, the Vermont Business Magazine, top 100 businesses, some of these ag-related businesses show up. The St. Albans Cooperative Creamery, now DFA, has taken over that cooperative. So they had the largest sales, 377 million. Poulin Grain, a company that sells grain to the dairy industry, but also dog food, cat food, small other livestock, horses, sheep, goats, etc. Black River Produce, a little closer to you folks in North Springfield, their sales 75 million, 200 employees. Holstein Association right there in Brattleboro, they're a breed association, so purebred cattle, their sales and employee numbers there, so some impact. Vermont Smoke and Cure has been taking in Vermont raised pork and making wonderful products out of that. They're a growing concern. Monument Farms is a small fluid milk processor up in Weybridge. Thomas Dairy, very similar in Rutland. And then something a little different, High Mowing Seed Company. They raise vegetables and collect the seeds for distribution in the next year for people to purchase and plant their own vegetables. So a company that's been growing tremendously. I did get reports back in the time of COVID, they sold out all of their seeds. Gardening has become a big thing in the time of COVID, people planting their own gardens. Some other economic impact of processors in our state. These would be considered urban, quote, kind of urban areas in Vermont. Brattleboro with Commonwealth, Bennington, Meadowbrook, they are a cheesemaker. Rhino Foods in Burlington, they make ice cream and cheesecake related dairy products. Ben & Jerry's, of course, 3 locations, St. Albans, Waterbury, and South Burlington. Perigo is a very large infant formula maker that's up in Georgia, Vermont. Franklin Foods is a soft cheese, a cream cheese maker, and then other types of cream cheese products up in Enosburg, and Swan Valley Cheese in Swanton. So certainly some jobs and some economic impact from those types of truly dairy related businesses in Vermont. The economy, we did a study a couple of years ago entitled it Milk Matters, but the extended dairy industry, cows through the production of ice cream and cheese, the dairy industry has a $2.2 billion impact on the Vermont economy. It's a fairly large impact. 3 million per day of circulating cash from dairy into Vermont. And when we talk about circulating cash, the headquarters of the dairy farms that produce the milk, when they receive their check, when that milk is sold to processors outside of the state, it brings money back into our state. It doesn't go off to corporate headquarters in India, Malaysia, Germany. It comes back into Vermont and is expended in Vermont. $3 million of circulating cash every day due to the dairy industry in Vermont. 6,000 to 7,000 jobs from the cows all the way to the finished product. Over 360 million in salary and wages. And some other data, 63% of the milk in New England comes from Vermont. So it is really, truly Vermont is a producing area, but Southern New England is a consuming area on milk and dairy products. So Vermont produces more milk and dairy products than its citizens can consume. So that connection to Southern New England with the larger population base is very important to Vermont. And then 15% of the state is covered by dairy farms, about 900,000 acres. So fairly substantial agricultural land use comes from dairy. This is hopefully a visible chart, but the largest source of that pie chart on the share of agricultural products sold in Vermont is milk from dairy cows, 65%. One of the next largest is cattle and calves. We don't have a tremendous beef industry. It's grown some, but it's still minor. That cattle and calves is mainly associated with the milk and dairy industry. So you could add that and get over 70% impact on agricultural sales really from the dairy industry. The other things are much smaller, crops and hay. Maple, only 4.2%. Maple is growing, and we'll talk about that in a bit, but it's still a small portion. And then you get down even into smaller numbers and smaller numbers. But dairy is the 800-pound gorilla in our agricultural economy in Vermont. When you look at the annual sales of Vermont dairy products and byproducts, that's 1.3 billion in a year's time. 400 million in fluid milk, 650 million in cheese, 130 million in ice cream, 100 million in yogurt and butter, 50 million in whey concentrate and lactose. So whey concentrate is considered one of those byproducts. After you make all that cheese, you have whey left over. Dried whey now is a very important ingredient in many products, bakery products, and then the lactose is a fragmentation of that whey, and the lactose is an important ingredient in lots of different products. Pardon me if you can hear some background noise. The neighbors are having work done, and I can't shut that one off, so it may be a little noisy, so hopefully bear with me. Hopefully it won't be distracting. About 2 million in manure as a soil amendment. There are farms in Vermont who take that manure and compost it further to sell that into the gardening industry, like a Moodoo or those products. And the last is about 2 million a year in electricity sales from farms who have invested in and put in a manure to methane digestion, and that methane gas is burned to produce energy. So a couple of different items there within that 1.3 billion. The land in agriculture is right around that 1.2 million acres, a little lower in 2017. And the number of farms, these are all types of farms in Vermont. And what does USDA look at when they count a farm? They're looking at any place that produced and sold, or normally would have sold, $1,000 or more of agricultural products during the census year. So $1,000 is not a tremendous threshold. I could have 10 laying hens at my home in Burlington and probably come up with $1,000 a year of selling eggs. So it's a pretty low threshold. If you start taking out the very smallest farms, you quickly come down into the $2,000 farms that are making more than 10,000 per year. So the small farms add up very quickly, so our numbers have been, fluctuating a little, 7,300 being the greatest number in 2012, and we're at a bit of a low in 2017 at 6,808. This is a lot of data on this slide. This is specifically about the dairy industry. The top line is the price paid. It fluctuates each year. Had a tremendous high point in 2014 of the milk price paid for hundredweight to farmers. Into 2019, not too bad a price, but it really dropped off during the time of COVID. We're seeing some very low prices. The number of dairy farms in Vermont, you're seeing back in 2010, 1,000, just over 1,000, and now we're down at 600 and about 650 right now. Milk production, though, has stayed pretty steady. If we were making widgets in a factory, we have less employees, so to speak, but more product coming out. So that's, if we're making widgets, that's a good thing. If you're talking about the economic impact of individual farms in rural communities, it's not a good thing, as we've lost a large number of farms. Cow numbers are down a little. In the first quarter of 2020, we're talking 124,000 cows, milking cows, versus the average of last year of 125,583. Then this is just a very simple average, the number of cows per farm, but you can see that's grown tremendously over the last 10 years, of 133 cows per farm in 2010 and up over 190 now in the first quarter of 2020. Organic farms have stayed relatively steady, right around the 200 or just under 200 actual farms. So out of that 650 total, right around 190 are certified organic, which is a different production method, but the farmers are paid differently on a more stable price. They get a contracted price for the year. So the stability is better than in the conventional world. But one of the big stories for the Vermont is the number of people making dairy products. So we have the large companies like a Ben & Jerry and a Cabot and Commonwealth who make large volumes of dairy products, but then we also have very, very small dairy producers that process less than 500 pounds of milk a day. Some of them have 3 or 4 cows or 50 goats, and they process very small volumes per day. We're up to around 154 of those processors. Off farm would be the tractor trailer or truck brings milk in and the product is made. On farm means that the person is milking some animals and making a product. So we've seen some growth there, but also in the off farm processors as well. So that's a kind of a bright spot. We have tremendous quality products. We've won, our cheesemakers and our yogurt producers and our butter makers have won national level and international level awards for the quality of their products. So that's a very bright spot for our dairy industry in Vermont. Dairy farms, this is cows only per county. You can see Windham is remained fairly steady in 2020 so far, right around 23, dropped a little June to 22 farms, but these are just active commercial dairy farms. So been fairly steady in Windham this year. Also fairly steady in Windsor, but overall we've seen a bit of a drop. May and June were tough months of the COVID price drop and other pressures. Quite a few farms ceased operations between May and June of this year. So some difficult times for our farmers. The breakdown of the size of these farms, sometimes folks like to know, what's your largest farm in Vermont and what are your smallest? The requirements around protection of water quality are based on the size of farms. So a large farm operation is over 700 milking cows. A medium farm operation is between 200 to 699. A small farm operation is under 200, and the legislature put in place certified small farms, which are between 50 and 200 milking cows. They put that requirement in place in 2017. So our largest farms, there's 33 of those in the state that are over 700 cows. The largest individual farm milking right around just under 3,000 cows. The medium farm dairy operations, 105 of those. The certified small farms, 268 out of the total of 539 in that small category, and ending up 2019 at 677 farms. So quite a divergence of sizes there, but still the majority of our dairy farms are very small. If we start looking at some non-dairy data from the census, the ones that have shown some growth are beef cows. As I mentioned, the sale of beef has improved in Vermont. During the time of COVID, many beef producers cannot keep up. Their demand has gone off the charts. People looking for locally produced beef. So that's changed a lot. The other area that has got some great potential is goat's milk. The number of milking goats has stayed about steady, but there's tremendous demand. In the central part of Vermont, we have Vermont Creamery that produces very high-end goat's milk cheeses, and they cannot get enough milk. They are looking for 3 to 4 million more pounds of milk, and goats don't make much milk. So it would take a lot more goats farms. So there is a push on trying to do that. Things were moving in a really good direction prior to COVID of some farmers switching out of cow dairy to go into goat dairy, but some of those have been put on hold due to the variables we're trying to deal with the COVID-19 outbreak. Some other information, non-dairy. This one, the barley, of course, is near to my heart with the craft beer industry, hoping that there'd be more barley producers. But there are some folks that produce wheat for grain, barley for grain, soybeans for the beans, human consumption as well as cattle consumption. Potatoes used to be much larger, more people growing potatoes in 2012, but fewer in 2017. Sweet potatoes has shown quite a rise though in production, and the land and orchards has grown. So more fruit production, and that includes nuts as well. We have fewer producing nuts in Vermont. It is possible, hazelnuts for sure, but fewer of those compared to the fruit trees. So some growth there as well. Excuse me. The other area is vegetables and fresh cut herbs grown in greenhouses, seeing some, a little bit of a decline there, but also some growth in the size. What's the square footage? Some of the really large greenhouses, more of those are going up over the 20,000 square feet. So some much larger ones going up there. So we do have some businesses involved in the growth of vegetables and fresh cut herbs in greenhouses. And the last is, one of the last areas is maple. Maple has seen a little decline in the number of producers, not tremendously, probably statistically significant, but I think some of this growth is maple producers getting larger and larger. The growth of the category of 10,000 or more taps. So producers would be asked, how many trees do you tap? Or how many taps do you have total? Some trees are large enough that they can support more than one tap, some up to 3 or 4. So the number of taps is a way to divide out what size a maple producer is. So certainly seeing greater and larger maple producers out there. So the other telltale is who's making the syrup. You can see from history that a lot of the syrup was made by the smaller number of taps, but now in 2017, those who tap more than 10,000 trees are making the majority of the maple syrup. So out of the 2 million gallons reported in 2017, 1.3 million were produced by the very largest maple producers. So similar trends, everybody gets larger, economies of scale, et cetera. I think our largest maple producers, there's one up in Island Pond area that's over 200,000 taps. So there's some very large maple producers out there. The retail value of maple syrup, $40 a gallon. It does fluctuate, but even the syrup that's out there and was out there in 2017 have about a $80 million in retail value. So it does bring some money in. There are maple processing facilities now that are fairly large businesses in the state that they buy in syrup from individual farmers and aggregate and market in a broader scope than individual farmers have marketed in the past. Hemp is changing our landscape. There's been a lot of information about hemp. You can see the great rise in acres registered in 2018. 2019 was a similar rise. 2020 has been slower because of COVID. We're seeing a few less people registering to grow. You have a very sizable hemp processor in the Brattleboro area who is doing the CBD oils and taking in hemp from individual farmers to process. So it's got potential. Little hard to monitor right now. COVID has interrupted some of those registrations, and what will people grow in 2020? So some concerns there. So the impact of COVID on our agriculture in Vermont, dairy has been quite severe. The dairy farmers, all predictions indicated that 2020 would be a better year for farmers. The trade issues had been ironed out between Mexico and Canada with the new NAFTA. The whole China trade issue had been ironed out. So there were expectations that on the export side, dairy was going to come back to normal, and that would help improve prices. Everything was pointing to a pretty strong economy in the United States, and that helps dairy sales. So farmers were very hopeful that the price for all of 2020 would be more around the $19 to $20 range, and with COVID, that's not occurring. So some of these impact in these price changes, these are all prices per hundredweight. The average size farm in Vermont produces 3.8 million pounds of milk per year. And so if you divide that out to a per day and then a monthly number, January, an average size farm, just the income from their milk would have been, with the price indicated, would have been $58,000. With the price indicated in May, with a steady milk volume, their milk checks would have gone down, $18,000. So just know that income is gone to them. So it's very difficult for farmers to balance out, their payments. May is a very tough month for farmers with all the cropping that gets started, planting crops, getting started, harvesting crops. There's a lot of expenses in May as well. If you look at that impact on the statewide, each month is around with these numbers is about 40 million. And so to drop down to 29 million was certainly, you know, an impact on what money is circulating in the state. So the, whoops, I think I moved a slide or not. There we go. So other things, milk with no home in because of the changes in COVID, restaurants closing, food service establishments, colleges, high schools, elementary schools. There was no home for some of this milk. The worst week in Vermont was about 9 tractor trailer loads that had to be disposed of that did not have a home. There was no place to process the milk, nor there was no market. I've been working with the project that brought many folks together, including Marty, your own Marty from your local Rotary, to move that milk into product that can be used by the food bank. We've done 4 loads so far, hoping to do 1 more tractor trailer load of milk. 2 are going through Commonwealth, hopefully 1 more. 1 tractor trailer load of milk makes 42,000 individual cups of yogurt. So the food bank is ecstatic about that. With kids out of school, cups of yogurt are tremendously positive product for the food bank to have. They're very happy with that. So some of the work you've all been doing to raise funding will allow us to do that 4th load of milk with Commonwealth. So that is, I believe they're, I think they started processing that load this week. We've got it worked out with Commonwealth to provide so many pallets per week of that 42,000, not inundating the food bank in 1 week because they don't have enough refrigeration. It just, you know, it blocks out all the other products they're trying to take in. So the Commonwealth has been very helpful to take so much per week to the food bank instead of, you know, sending it all in 1 week after they processed it. They're also providing a mix of product, you know, strawberry and maple and vanilla, whatever they're processing, they put aside so many cases of that each day. So they get a mix of flavors, not just 1 flavor. Same thing, a tractor trailer load equals 6,000 gallon jugs of milk. HP Hood up in Barre, Vermont has done the same thing, and we've done 2 tractor trailer loads there for milk to the food bank. So it's been very helpful. The impact are artisan cheese and butter makers. The reports that the agency got in on a survey that we put out was between 50 and 95% loss in sales into restaurants and high-end cheese shops. So that's a big impact on those small producers. We had 1 cheesemaker, you know, put out something on Front Porch Forum. The cave was full. The cows are still milking. He gave away a cave full of cheese just to his local families. You know, the road was backed up for miles of people coming by to get their blocks of cheese. Different sales outlet online. There's a couple online activities with victory boxes of cheese, mixed cheese from Vermont cheesemakers in 1 box, FedEx to your house kind of thing. So people looking at very different manners of getting product out than they would have before. Red meat and poultry can't keep up with demand. For our local slaughterhouses, many of them are booked out 8 to 10 weeks in advance. For if you're a farmer that has an animal and you want to take it to slaughter, you're out 8 to 10 weeks before you can be fit in to the slaughter facility. So very busy right now. Poultry, many of those, mainly raising poultry is a summertime activity, and those sales are up dramatically. Those farmers aren't being able to keep up with demand as well. We are lucky in Vermont. We've had no COVID-related shutdowns of slaughter and processing businesses. So very happy about that. We've done a lot of work around protective equipment and trying to get social distancing and all those things with our slaughter facilities in Vermont. Vegetables, the timing is important. The COVID main, you know, hit in March and April, not as much vegetable production then. We've got the farmers markets back open. This is the time of year that, you know, the vegetable production really takes off. So timing is a little better on that. Pick your own. We're getting guidance out for those farms that, you know, especially like strawberries and blueberries. How do we do that safely with social distancing? So getting those guidelines out as well. Some more online ordering, curbside pickup, farmers choosing to do delivery. So lots of changes, trying to keep up with demand. Maple, if you were a maple producer that sold directly to restaurant, you were very heavily impacted. But if the wholesale market into supermarkets, Costco, those kind of things, their sales did not decline. So kind of some differences of how you marketed. Nursery industry is booming. People are at home. They bought more flowers. They are planting more gardens. The nursery folks could not keep up after we could get them back open with proper social distancing and those activities. Still recovering. You know, there's USDA money going out directly to farms. There's been a food box distribution in Vermont supported by USDA, so those are both very positive. The state legislature is looking at 30 to 50 million direct payments to agriculture in Vermont. That hasn't been finalized yet in the legislature. We're not sure on vegetables and fruits where they'll come in, how much impact it will be. Just pick your own. Will people go out? You think about at the end of the year, apples, pumpkins, etc. Where will we be with those? Restaurants, it's great that they're starting to open up with outdoor dining and limited seating. Will it be enough demand? We're kind of all learning as we go. And the state's colleges and secondary schools, sounds like we're going to be opening, and then how will that work? So lots of unknowns still. So thank you for listening in. Here's my contact information, Diane Bothfeld at vermont.gov, but willing to take your questions at this time if you have any. And sorry about the background noise.
Thank you, Diane. I realize that people may need to leave at momentarily, but if anyone does have a question, we can at least do one before we adjourn the meeting. Please type in the chat box if you're able to. Well, with Diane's contact information there, I think if you do think of a question, I'm sure she'll be happy to respond. Diane, thank you very much. That was fascinating and very informative, and I appreciate your time with us.
You're welcome. Glad to speak with your group anytime. And thank you so much for the fundraising work you've all been doing to help support the Milk to the Food Bank program. It's been a really good program, and thanks for that support so we can get another load processed into yogurt. Thank you.
Great, thank you. And we'll adjourn the meeting. See you next week.
Have a good week, everybody.
Bye, everybody.